Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, I'm your host today, Michael Howard, and this is Now That's Significant. I'm joined today by Febronia, Strategic Insights Professional and newly certified Executive Coach. Febronia has led insights for notable food and drink and OTC brands like Cadbury-Schweppes, Diageo, Heineken, Carlsberg, Twinings, Heinz and GSK. Thanks for joining us on the show again, Feb.
Oh, it's brilliant to be here. I'm so excited to be here for the second time. Thank you so much for having me, Michael, and I'm ready to spill the tea.
Ooh, I see what I see what you did there with some of your past work. So Feb, what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
I think the insight and MRX industry is faced with quite a lot of challenges at the moment, not only on the client side, but also agencies who are wanting to really provide an excellent service. There's so much great, good intention in our industry, but the dynamics and the way we're all doing it and working together is not always so straightforward, specifically dependent on the cultures and the big organizations. So I'd like to explore some of that and use some of my experience to maybe, provide listeners with a little bit of guidance on things they can think about and they can do to help them, leverage relationships and partnerships and do some good work. So facing those challenges.
So it's been over a year now since we had our last podcast episode. You've been on a handful of other podcasts since then, and you've also worked with a few of the larger consumer businesses, so client-side organizations. Have you been experiencing similar perspectives from those discussions and those placements that you've had?
Yeah, and some of the podcasts have been really interesting. I did one with Abigail Dixon on the whole marketeer, and we looked at strategic insights and we explored in depth some of the challenges that the marketeers are facing, such as lack of resource, lack of time, being expected to crunch and munch a lot of data themselves, not always having insight resource to help them. And the need to create great activation under pressure. And then with Ryan Barry on the Inside Insights podcast from Zappi, we looked at what the introduction of AI means for researchers and how that means we need to do more stakeholder management and disseminate insights more commercially and broadly across businesses. So I think there's a lot of flux at the moment as we come to terms with the whole AI revolution, how we work with it, and also what the lack of resource, smaller insight teams, less time, less money, what does that mean for our strategic insight people, both internally and externally?
There's some good chunky challenges that you've mentioned there.
Yeah, there are, certainly are.
So earlier this year, you posted on LinkedIn how you'd never seen a marketer as excited about meeting a market research partner as you had seen an advertising agency partner. Where did this idea come from?
Well, it was a bit of a naughty provocation from me on a thread on LinkedIn. It was a discussion talking about that possibly marketeers had fallen out of love with research. And it just prompted the thought in me, have I ever seen a marketeer get so excited about seeing a research partner as they do an advertising agency? But, it was a naughty provocation. Let's be fair. Who doesn't get excited about meeting with a big, famous ad agency like Saatchi's, Adam and Eve, Leo Burnett? It's wonderful. It's a really exciting time. So it's understandable that marketeers get really excited about that, but wouldn't it be great if they meeting with the research partners and having meetings with the insight team with that same energy and excitement? Okay, we might not bring a Cannes Lion Award, but we can help them get one.
Yeah, true. Can you get a Cannes Lion Award if you don't have a good insight?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because often marketeers see us as being an extra constraint in the process rather than an actual partner that can help them achieve their goals and drive that excellence.
So, do you think there's some truth in what you've just been talking about here, in terms of research agencies being not as exciting, or do you think it's something that people have been increasingly served with poorer insight, so it's just led to that?
I think there's a lot of things going on. So the things that we discussed at the beginning. So there's lots of challenges in the environment, lack of budget, lack of resource, lack of time. Also, the way that insights is potentially being used, heavily used for measurement and KPI tracking, and almost like a test and fail for marketeers. It's not been conducive to building their love for research, if you like. So making it an integral part of the marketing planning process and something that will actually be seen as a helper rather than a hindrance would really change that. So I think, to be fair to our marketing community, they are faced with tremendous challenge. A lot is expected of them, notwithstanding working under pressure, working to tight deadlines, a lot of stress as well. So, let's be fair. But, insight is an incredible, powerful tool. And if it's done properly, it can just enhance all that activation and drive the consumer into the heart of the business. And effectively, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to win the consumer loyalty. So we need to find better ways of partnering with our marketing teams.
So, I mean, in marketing, there's been a really big push over the last decade for programmatic, for digital advertising, which like you can track down to the zero, the decimal points. Do you think that's had some impact as well? So from a ROI perspective, we're trying to put a dollar figure on something that's a little bit more challenging to actually track?
There's always been ROI, and we've always tried to track it as best we can, but some of the marketing effectiveness models are not always constructed in the right ways. So if you haven't got the right inputs, you're not going to get the right outputs. So I was listening to Dr. Grace Kite talk on The Whole Marketeer about the whole process of modeling, and it's really sophisticated stuff, and you need to get the right variables in there. So um, that's the caveat I would have. If you're not tracking the right things, how are you going to get the right ROI?
That's true. And then I guess if you start with your insight and then you move on to the execution, that's going to play a big role in it as well. So how the insight's been interpreted, translated, and put into the market is going to play a
Exactly.
big
And
role.
yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Michael. Building on that, I was getting really excited. Building on that point, you need to make sure your creative, for example, is built on the right insight to start off with. So it really highlights the need for the whole research process to be pristine from start to finish, end to end. So we can't pick and choose where we do the testing and the validation. We need to do it throughout the whole process at each of the milestones.
No, for sure. I know, so I worked in advertising as a creative before I went into market research and the tech world as well. And I know sometimes it felt like the insights in our briefs that we were given were just slapped on there, and like you just don't know the history on it. And it's such a shame for all of the work that's been done to be minimized. By sometimes you even have a number of insights in the brief as well, and that's a bit of a process thing. But yeah, I guess there's some work that could be done on that too.
That's frustrating. I've been very lucky because a lot of the big brands I've worked on when we've been developing advertising, we have had great partnership and collaboration with marketing, and we have done extensive insight validation at the very beginning of the creative process with the help of the creatives, and really working together as one cohesive team to make sure we've got the right idea, that the creative is built on the right insight idea. Because if you haven't got that, you don't know that you're doing the right thing. So before all that mega investment is made in creating the animatics and so on, to then go into the future link testing or whatever advertising quant testing you're doing, it's important to make sure that the whole process is built on a strong foundation.
No, for sure. So in your post, and just from what I've heard from you, you're talking about three different types of marketing partner. Can you let us know what they are and then perhaps have a look at each of them then?
I have to give a bit of a disclaimer here that this is based purely on my perceptions and purely on my experience. And I have to say, I've been very lucky that most of my marketing partners have fallen into the first group, the insight driven, but there have been one or two that fall into the other group. So it might be worth just outlining them so that listeners can have a sense, because sometimes an insider or client side researcher has got all the good intentions and best will in the world, but if you don't have the collaboration of your partner, your stakeholder, it's going to be very difficult to get your processes embedded in the organization. So the personality of the marketeers can really drive your success or failure, if you like. So the first one is insight driven, and this partner is the dream because they are very on board, they're very consumer driven. They want to strive for excellence. They see research as an integral part of the planning process, and they want to work with you to construct the best program of mixed methodological research. The brief is super. You work together, you nail the brief at the start. Everybody knows what they're doing. And in an ideal world, you get all of your agencies working collaboratively together. So, for example, in my time at Heineken, we'd have big sessions with all the agencies that we were working with, working together on the processes. So a real holistic and cohesive approach. So that is the ideal, and that, from my experiences, produces the best work. So that's the first one, insight driven. Then the second group are the triers. These are the marketeers who are a bit cynical, a bit skeptical. They know they have to work with you. They don't really want to, but they're going to give it a try. But they're quite energy draining because you have to keep explaining and over explaining and over influencing to get each part of the process agreed on. But they do, they do want to give it their best shot, and there is goodwill in terms of them working with you to test different elements of the marketing mix. But they can take up a lot of your time because they're not 100% on board. And also, there can be a tendency to micromanage or to try and control the process because they want a specific outcome, or they're very focused on the end output that they want rather than opening it up to give the outputs that the consumer brings. So can feel very constraining and frustrating working with them, but there is opportunity to influence and challenge. And then there's the third group. Now, these are the most difficult, and luckily I've only had one or two over the years, but these are the adversarial rejectors. They really do not want to work with insight partners. They see you as a hindrance, they see you as getting in the way, they don't believe that their ideas need to go through consumer testing. They believe it goes on gut instinct, that they know what they're doing based on years of experience. And let's face it, a lot of them do have a lot of experience. However, the downside is that if they don't test the different elements of creative, it can come back to bite them, in the behind. Because if you're not sure that you're producing something the consumer wants and needs, be it creative or be it product innovation, then you're taking a lot of risk. So you can't mitigate risk with those guys, and it makes for very challenging relationships. It can be incredibly stressful working with an adversarial rejector because they really don't want to partner you, and it's nothing to do with you or your skills or your credibility. They just do not want to do it.
So do you see the first insider being quite happy and excited to be meeting with you, and then the triers somewhat less, and then the adversarials not so much?
Yeah, there is a distinct pattern. So the insight driven, they are engaging, they are collaborative, they do meet with the research partners, they do get on board. And they're very much a part of the whole discussion and process, which is great because if something is going wrong, you can pick up on it along the way and auto correct. The triers, a little bit umming and ahhing, but they'll do it, but it's a little bit frustrating, and you can tell they don't really want to be there. The adversarial rejectors, they don't want to know.
Have you come across any examples where you've been able to push some of those into the higher funnel, so the adversarial into triers and then triers into insight driven?
I've had examples of where I've managed to motivate and engage the triers and to actually convert them into being more insight driven because they see the value, and where I've been able, through great insight process management, been able to save budget for them. So that's been a great winner. Being completely transparent, I've had one or two adversarial rejectors where we've had heated debates, and I've had to set boundaries, but also had to say, you've got to do this testing because it's mandatory within the organization. So, I appreciate your stance, I appreciate your view, but let's find a way of doing this work. Um, and let's see what comes out of it. And I've had one occasion where there was a little bit of a shift, but those guys are pretty locked down. They're not into the whole research thing, and particularly in innovation, they see it very much as slowing them down, incurring costs. So you're really starting off on the back foot. So the only way to work with them is to achieve a kind of sense of acceptance that you can only do so much.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not going to win them over 100%. So even if you achieve 10% engagement, then that's a real coup.
Okay, well, thanks for giving us those overviews. Considering these three types of marketers, what kinds of challenges can market researchers help them with? Are there any differences in approach you take with the different types of marketer that you've provided?
Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of things, and this is probably helpful to independents or agencies that are trying to forge that partnership. With the insight driven, you can always strive for excellence, so adding value. So although they're pretty engaged and there's a strong brief, there's nothing to stop partners from pushing the envelope, so making something even better because they're open to it. And it's really great because there's a real holistic desire to produce the best outputs and work that you can. With the triers, you need to convince them that the process is going to be worth the effort, so that what they will gain will be 10 times more than what they expect. So, for example, get them involved, try and get them to see qualitative groups, to watch them online, to participate. And also what I've done with those guys in the past is, when we've done innovation, is do workshops with the consumer in the room with the client. So they've had the opportunity to actually listen to what the consumer is saying. And that is mind blowing for them because they hear things that they had no idea the consumer was thinking. So that can be really powerful. And with the adversarial rejectors, what you can do there is try and appeal to their sense of winning. So how can you provide value that will be a real award for them, bring them greater recognition, because that's one way of getting them to listen. So if they are driven by awards and what have you, then talk to them in that language. So, you think your ad is going to win an award. How can we make sure we do that? So try and partner with them in a way that appeals to their priorities.
I was wondering if you could also potentially gamify it a little bit as well. So you have your hypothesis going into the research, and then if you're more correct or if I'm more correct, we have to buy each other lunch or something like that.
Oh yeah, you can use a little bit of humor, but I think you're not going to get much airtime with those guys because they
Sure.
are so closed off to the whole process. And luckily, they are very rare that, in the big organizations, like I said, I've rarely come up against group three. But when I have, it can be quite disconcerting because you're trying everything you possibly can. But I just found the one thing that worked for me was talk to them in a language that they understand, that drives their sense of commitment.
Do you think it's also potentially a bit of a top level issue as well? So their leadership might not believe in marketing or market research, and so that hasn't really been encouraged or fostered within the organization?
It's definitely a cultural thing because if the insight team has a good profile, and if there's an insights director that sits on the exec, then there is more opportunity to bring in creative thinking and drive the agenda. If the organization is very finance driven, or I've worked in organizations which have been equity driven, with investors and so on, then the focus is very different. So they might have the perception that, insight and research is just extra budget. So you have to find ways of navigating those cultural perceptions. But you're right, it is driven very much from the organizational structure.
Yeah, from what you're seeing as well, what access do these marketers have to tools that enable them to go and self-serve or explore some of the data that they have as well? Or are they typically being just handed findings and then having to loop back with their agencies, etc.?
It depends very much on the organization. So some, and I won't name names, but some of them that I've worked in have had great portals, great knowledge banks, great access to everything, and market data and everything accessible on the portal. So everybody is trained and everybody can self-serve. Now that is the ideal, because it means that you're not having to go to someone to get information. It's accessible to everybody. It's democratizing the knowledge. And that is the best way to do it. Then there have been times where there hasn't been a repository, there hasn't been a logging of past research, there hasn't been a database built, and therefore it's reliant on the head of insight or the insight team who have managed those projects. Now, when they move on, some of that info gets lost because nobody knows where it's kept. And that's a real shame, but that is a reality sometimes. As well. But given all the technology and tools we have today and how easy it is to build libraries on Microsoft Teams, there's no excuse for not having repositories of information, but it does still happen, I'm afraid.
I mean, you're having to start again and
oh yeah,
and repeat mistakes as well, potentially too, which is frightening.
That is frightening. And also, don't forget, when marketeers come on board, they often want to change things because they want to land their own impact. So often they come up with an idea that, like you say, has been tested in the past. So if you have that information stored, you can pull it up and say, look, we've done this before and it didn't work. So what is it exactly that we're trying to do, and how can we add value and make sure that we delight consumers and shoppers?
So if we can come back to one of your earlier reflections, why are marketers not as excited about meeting market research partners as ad agencies? Perhaps we can go into a bit more detail.
Because it's challenging, because it's not so sexy as creating beautiful, shiny new ads and potentially winning awards, because some of it is dull and monotonous. You've got to pull all bits of data together and, dig out the old databases. It's kind of grueling a little bit. It's not so exciting. And a lot of researchers, we're quite introverted. We're not, the shiny, loud, funny, big personas that you get in the advertising world. So maybe if we start injecting a bit more fun into what we do, that could help. But also, there's a lot of risk with research. And if we don't get it right, then the activation budgets might be cut. So there's a fear as well. They might want to avoid the research because, I need to get this out by Easter, and if I don't, I'm going to lose market share. So there's a lot riding on it, to be fair to those guys. A lot of their career is riding on the success of their plans for that year, for the immediate and then for the longer term as well.
No, for sure. So as I mentioned before, I worked in advertising prior to this, so creativity is quite an important thing for me as well. And some of the best ads I've seen that have come from such a clear insight. One of my favorite ads, for instance, from the Super Bowl this year was the Uber Eats ad. If you want to remember something, you forget something else. And there are so many different snippets that they had within that ad spot where it just talked and drilled into that there. So that was really well done. I think Special was the agency who did that, and they started here in Auckland as well before expanding, which is a nice little touch. But my point with that is that the special were the ones that went and basically gave fame to Uber Eats. And the agency that came up with the insight was probably not as front of mind compared to the CEO or the managing director of the ad agency who got
No.
the client to meet Victoria Beckham.
Mm.
I guess the irony is that when I was creating the planning for this here, I actually forgot Victoria's name. Like, what was David Beckham's wife's name? But yeah.
But that was a superb ad. But I did think at the end they should have used the line with Jennifer Aniston, but we were on a break.
Yes.
I missed a trick there, but it was built on really good insight that you just forget one or two things. But it kind of sums up quite well how having that consumer learning central to your creative is so powerful. It makes such a difference because it resonates, that ad, the minute we saw it, it resonated with all of us, didn't it?
That's right. And so, yes, listening to your consumers, understanding how people live and operate
Absolutely.
is really important. And like just something as simple as forgetting something, like some people would go, well, how's that relevant to Uber Eats? Like, well,
because they quickly deliver it for you.
that's right. Very true. So yeah, definitely a
Yeah.
partnership, and you definitely need to have that insight before you can have that superb creative. So
Yeah, so I guess summing it all up, let's be honest with ourselves. A marketeer is never really going to be as excited to meet us, the insight or the market research partners, as they are an ad agency. And it was a provocative statement from me, but I think we can use that to inspire ourselves and say, how can we elevate and amplify our message so that we do become more exciting, that we do become more fun, that we do provide impact, and they see that using our expertise provides more potential to win great awards because they're putting the consumer at the heart of everything they do. And that's what we all want, because the industry wants to work well together in partnership. I don't know any agencies that don't want great partnership with the client and marketing teams.
that's right. Any final reflections on how researchers can work better with marketers to drive greater outcomes for consumers and therefore their own business?
I think the three typologies that I've explained based around my experiences are quite useful, and I would recommend people to give it some reflection. So not only about our skills, but think of our communication styles, how we're going to influence these different types of personalities, where there's a different degree of openness to our work, and how are we going to influence and try and better partner them, because it's easy to give up and say, oh, it's not going to work. But I liked your questions about what have you done to try and move them up a tier, and I think we can all use that as a kind of basis for developing great partnerships. So don't be disheartened at the first hurdle, but think, how can I convince this stakeholder that what I'm going to bring to the table is going to have ultimate benefit for their plan and for their career.
I mean, so we've talked about this it's sort of from an agency to a marketer relationship, but you've got a lot of that can be translated from a corporate side market researcher to their stakeholders, can't you? You've got stakeholders that are insight driven, that are triers, and that are also the
Adversarial rejectors.
The rejectors, yes. So a lot of what we've talked about today can equally apply to those trying to gain support from their internal business.
I think agencies have the support of the internal client side insight person, because they act as a good buffer, if you like, between the agencies and the marketing team. And the way I've always worked is to work in collaboration with the agencies, but knowing what the objectives are from the stakeholders. So I almost look after them and make sure that we're all working to the same objectives. And then I almost become part of the external agency team as we work together to deliver the results to the client stakeholders. But I think one thing I would mention is that agencies also need to respect that the client side insider is also very research and brand strategy savvy. So not to think of them just as a facilitator, they are actually someone who's going to give great input into the work as well. So there has to be a communal recognition of each other's role in the whole mix and what each other brings to the party, and then harnessing that in the best way for the project.
No, for sure. It sounds like you'd be a very good addition to any insights team. So some really good perspectives you brought today.
Done it for too long, Michael. But the thing that I always come away with, there is so much positive intent in our industry. It's a beautiful industry, but the dynamics change because of the structures of businesses, the financial implications and pressures. And it's good that we're giving it time to reflect on these structures today, because hopefully it will provide some thinking or some inspiration for someone who's maybe finding things a bit challenging at the moment.
That's right. And I think when you are in that spot where you are finding things challenging, I think it can be really good just to step back and consider how much you've actually done to positively impact the business. So as a researcher, what research have you provided that's led to X ad campaign that's provided an award or a big bit of business to the organization as well? You don't realize how much that actually adds up, and it can be quite encouraging, I guess, just for you to reflect on.
Yeah, and also don't forget where you've done research and it hasn't worked. The activation hasn't worked. Look how much you've saved the business by saying this is not going to work. It might have been uncomfortable coming back with the results that the marketeers didn't really want, but look at how much risk you've mitigated and how much budget you've saved. So I think we're not very good at blowing our own trumpets, but we do deliver a lot for the businesses we work in.
No, that's true. That's another really good point as well. So yes, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Feb.
Thank you for having me. It's been a brilliant discussion, and it's been a real honor to come back for a second time. I've loved it, and we've spilt some tea.
We have. So look, hopefully we'll have some better market researcher, marketer relationships as a result of this podcast.
Hopefully it will inspire agencies as well.
Yes, and anyone who wants to, feel free to share this podcast with others. Even if you're a researcher, sharing it with your marketer, your client, if you're bold enough.
Share it with those adversarial rejectors.
And let's prove them wrong.
There's always a way to convert them if we try hard enough.
That's right. If you say the right things enough times, hopefully you get some traction, and they'll start coming around to your point as well.
Thank you.
That's all right. So thank you to everyone who has listened today. If you have liked the podcast, feel free to, as I said, share it with others. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a review, or reach out to either myself or Febronia as well. We'd be very appreciative for any of that. So until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.